So there's something that we all have that not all men have, and I don't know if all women like that all men have, is facial hair.
Mm.
And it's hard if you're not watching this, but McKenzie, you have a polished mustache you've been growing. HD, you always have a nice 15 o'clock shadow. Um,
It's a suburban goatee, too.
excuse me.
Jeez.
Um, and I think I have, very similar to Mackenzie, a stash, but left a little bit of soul underneath the bottom lip.
It's Fletcher the Caribbean.
Um, can you, Mackenzie? I'm gonna start with you. Talk to me about the journey of the mustache and why you decide to wear it.
It's really become a signature move for him. Just kind of out of nowhere, it just
Become a new identity.
yeah.
Well, I was thinking as I approached 30, um, I wanted to make a nice change to signify the next decade. Even though I've got a couple years before 30,
Yeah.
you got to start the foundation for the identity change. So that's kind of what I've been doing. But
I mean,
Fletch, you have you have the facial hair that I would expect from someone from Tampa.
Which is what exactly?
Well, you've got your mustache, but then you've also got that little overflow that goes on the bottom of the mouth.
it's the pirate patch. I mean, it's
Yeah,
sarsaparilla season.
I think I got very inspired by, the Johnny Depp, which shows a little bit the unhinged side of me, and then also
That's a
the
good word for him. Unhinged. Yeah.
thank you. I totally agree. And then also I feel like it speaks to the young artist, right?
Hmm. But you don't have to convince anyone you're an artist. You already have that, bro. Just so
Thank
you
you.
know.
No, I
I,
mean,
I
just
I was looking for a little
what you're
convincing.
wearing, where you're living, like everything signifies artist for sure.
Mhm. And Mackenzie, I'm pretty sure when you were 14, you were like, I'm coming up on 30. Uh, at least just been waiting to turn 30 for
28,
at
28's
least
approaching 30.
15 years.
I've
Uh,
never heard someone prep so much for 30.
You got to prep for the 30. 30 is the glory days now. It's the
well,
70s version of the 20s. So,
I mean, it's not the defining decade, though.
No way. That got kicked to the curb long ago. And HD
Uh,
is referring to a book that I absolutely, I would say disagree with, and I,
do you
just put
think
in my free library.
you really gave it enough visibility? Like you read through the whole thing to really form an opinion?
Yes, and I
Yeah,
think that's when I knew
what
I was
book is this?
the
defining.
defining decade, Mackenzie.
Someone recently was like, "You really need to read this book, The Defining Decade." That was like last week, and I told him that Fletch, like your feelings on it, Fletch, and she was like, "Huh, that's interesting. Yeah, I could definitely see where he's coming from." And she was like, "It's one of my favorite books to kickstart conversation."
I
Mm.
mean, think about you get the alliteration, and your target audience is a whole decade. Of course, you're gonna win. I mean, it's a great name of a book.
But most people don't read it in their 20s, and so they're often retroactively looking back. And I guess your argument is it can create some shame.
My argument is the whole time I think she's just using case studies as a way to leverage her argument, which is smart. And I think I have gone about my 20s a different way, and I don't want to look back on them and say I should have done something different because I don't think that's healthy.
Mm. There's this new thing that I've been seeing pop up, which is like, I've noticed that, I mean, people weaponize data to work for their argument. Heck, I do it all the time. But if you like Google something, like, hey, if you Google like, is coffee good for me? Then you'll get a bunch of links on like why coffee's good for you. If you Google like why is coffee bad for me, you get a bunch of links for why coffee's bad at you. Like people will weaponize data to make any point online. And so even though, yeah, if it's, Google secured, it doesn't mean that that's the defining like medical or emotional diagnosis of any sort of belief or stance.
Mackenzie, you bring up I'm so glad you brought that up because I was talking to this guy. He's a fabulous movement coach in the space of stretching mobility, and he brought up this terminology with me, and he called it a nocebo. And people using data or a certain way to market something almost to like scare them into a certain direction.
Yeah.
And so he was talking about like how certain movement schools or people online will use nocebos to convince people that they shouldn't move a certain way.
Yeah. And I try to cite data after seeing how the data was sourced. That's to me the big tell of whether the data is legitimate or not, because there's legit organizations. I mean, and they go into a specific study with a biased view or with like an intention to get a certain answer that they already feel is conclusive. So sourcing that data and figuring out how they're gathering it is like the key. And I try to only reference data where I'm like, okay, I like how this is sourced.
Speaking of data, let's jump in.
Jump into that pool, HD.
It's gonna be alright.
If you can give your community permission, especially with men, it can go a long way.
And only from that place of peace can a relationship truly be reconciled.
I saw the But if I stop and create a little space, then there's that room for response. Then I can actually check in with myself.
Welcome back to Dudes with Feelings. This is Henry. I'm with my buds and fellow dudes with feelings, Fletch and McKenzie. And this is another episode where we're each coming armed with some compelling clips of media or articles that can start a conversation. The purpose is for us to grow together as we just seek to figure out what does it mean to be an integrated man in the world today, to be able to show up whole for ourselves, but also for the people that we care about and love in this world. That's a pretty simple goal, really. You put it that way, right?
Yeah. HD, do you want to start with your clip?
Yes, I believe I'm ready to.
Hold on. Do you have a tattoo on your arm?
Let's not talk about that.
Whoa. Hold on.
Wait,
Let's
I don't
see
know
it.
where you saw it because I actually don't have a tattoo.
Right. No. Other side. Okay.
No, dude, that's his bicep.
Yeah,
it was the shadow from his
It's been
muscles.
protruding. Yeah.
My bad. It looked like, well, I don't want to say what it looked like, but I was concerned for a second, so I'm glad it was just a shadow. Go ahead.
He bought Hermosi's fourth book, $100 Million Girls.
All he needs is his nose strip, and he's good to go.
Oh, you guys are brutal.
Sorry, bro.
Okay. So yeah, I'll jump in. Let's just watch the clip and we can have a little chat about it.
Next time that you're at a party or any sort of gathering, look at the angle of the feet of women talking to women and of men talking to men. Women will talk to women 180 degrees. They'll be face to face. Whereas men, the average is 120 degrees. Once you see that, you can't not see it. And it's a rule that works across so many different things. The Men's Sheds initiative in Australia, did you see that? It was an initiative by the Australian government, I think, to try and improve men's mental health. They realized that getting men to sit down in a room and talk like this about their problems didn't work. So what they did is they built sheds that men came to, and then the men would bring, like, I've got this knackered lawnmower and everyone needs to help fix it. So how are men talking? They're talking whilst their front brain is focused on this thing that's in front, and they are shoulder to shoulder, not face to face. They're literally in a circle, and everyone's like, right, you've got the good drill, and he's got the good spanner, and I've got the hammer or whatever, and let's fix this thing. And dude, me and the missus were not getting on well, and before you know it, it's a therapy session mediated by this fucking lawnmower.
Therapy session mediated by this lawnmower. That's
yeah, I
beautiful.
just want initial reactions, then I'll kind of share why I picked it.
First off, who's talking about dumb data? Who's sitting there going, oh, on average, men are angling their knees or feet towards someone at a certain degree more or less than women? Like, can we not like address the main concern instead of just focusing on the angle of somebody's feet on average.
McKenzie, that's very important. That's body posture. I'm going in with a protractor next party I go to.
Look. Hesitant on bringing this up, but I noticed this element of communication, and a lot of people use that angle of the knees as an indicator of whether someone's actually intently like listening, or if someone's like actually like wanting to flirt or something like that in a conversation. And when we were in New Orleans, when HD was single, that's how I discovered this thing. Um,
Did you have a protractor? Were you measuring the angles?
well, I just noticed. I was like, why are
Henry's knees?
why
pointed
is
towards the person
Henry's
he's
knees
talking to?
always pointed directly at them, even though they're sitting next to each other? Henry will like would shift his knees to face the woman.
Is that why I was sending confusing signals when I didn't mean to?
Yes, dude, you gotta face the lawnmower.
At one point, McKenzie just came to me and was like, "Hey, man, like, you really, I think, need to be a lot more careful with your eye contact. Like, it's just probably best you don't look people in the eyes."
It's
Like,
true.
what-
It's
what-
true. Honestly, there were times where HD would look me in the eyes and I'd get the wrong idea. I just
Well, I'm gonna
This
have
is-
to interrupt this conversation. If you guys need to get a room, you guys can go ahead and do that.
Oh.
HE, maybe it was because your knees wanted something different than your brain, or maybe like your lower half was operating a little bit different than your upper half.
his lower half had a different idea than his upper half. That's
And it makes sense how this clip found you.
No, this is a bunch of garbage. Fletch, I know
You
you're
heard
a
that,
body language
HD.
guy. Fletch, you're a body language guy.
You heard that guy and you're like, this is legit. This is
This is big time.
this is
big time.
speaking to me.
Okay. I think we may be missing some points here. So Fletch, reel us back in. What did you get from this?
Body posture, body composition. I think men struggle with shoulder to shoulder interactions, and they need a thing as like the diffuser. And in this case, he's talking about this, I guess it's a case study where in Australia, where men would come around and have something, a joined activity, which could then diffuse the room or space. And then they could start hashing out and talking about the real problems.
What I don't like about this is we're accepting a principle that men can't talk face to face. And this is like a workaround for that. But, you know, with my coaching with men, they're not nervous for what we're talking about. They're nervous for sitting with me for an hour and having a straight conversation face to face or like direct with each other. And so a lot of times that's where we start is how can we be okay with facing directly to each other? And I honestly think actually there's a lot of deeper reasons why men can't have face-to-face conversations, instead have to sit next to each other and have conversation, which we'll actually probably dive in later with my material that I brought. But I don't think it solves the problem. It just creates a suitable solution for like a suitable workaround for what the real solution could be. That's my thought.
Yeah, I feel like it makes the barrier to entry a little bit easier for guys to have those deeper conversations. And I think there's two things here, right? One is just wanting to bring a conversation around how do we posture ourselves to talk to men versus say we were talking to women, and how influential our body language is in what we're communicating. Obviously, his data is just super broad. Like there's no real depth to the data, but I think each of us can think about the way that men talk to men versus the women talk to women and be like, yeah, there's something very different there. Like the male to male relationship is different in the way that we interact.
But did you see the things that he mentioned they talked about when they sat next to each other too? It wasn't actually things that allowed them to truly get deeper. It was just things that kind of maintained those typical like masculine complaints men have with other men. So it doesn't actually solve the problem. It just kind of introduces, like you said, like a stepping stone into actually talking about things. but they're still maintaining that masculine image through those complaints. So I don't understand and the benefit of this, because like we talked about last episode about using your feminine and your masculine in harmony with one another,
Mhm.
all it's doing is motivating one and not using the other.
Okay, I have a contrary or a disagreeing point to that, because what I'm going to bring in or what I'm going to offer is the idea of subtext, Mackenzie. I think sometimes we might be talking about the lawnmower not working, or we're talking about something, but as a man, it's not necessarily what we're always talking about, but the emotion and the tone in which it's coming out. And so I think sometimes you need to be able to shoot the shit and talk about the light stuff and football, movies, all that stuff, in order to kind of set some sort of precedence to get into a deeper level.
I 100% agree with you on that. Where I think where I'm disagreeing with this point is he's making the argument that this is the solution for men to get vulnerable with each other. And to me, like it doesn't go that far. I definitely think you need that kind of talk, Fletch, in growing a relationship with somebody. But he was kind of making the argument that this is how you can get men to talk about deeper things. And I just don't think that that's actually effective long term.
I think the argument I heard was men want to talk about deeper things. They don't always know how, and they're much better at doing it if there's something that they're gathering around. And so, I mean, I was having a conversation with Matt Long, who's been on the podcast before, yesterday, and he was, we were just talking about, men's mental health, like how can we gather men and have more of these intentional conversations. And one of the things that, he always goes back to is, well, we first need the thing that they can do before we get into this space where we actually are intentional to have the conversations. And so I think there's a lot of truth to it. Like, is it a workout class? Is it we watching a movie? Are we doing, like, what is the thing that's like kind of, as Fletch was talking about, and I think we all agree, like men do love doing things together. And so it almost needs to be centered on doing, more so than it is on just the raw emotion. Obviously, some people will pay for the coach, but a lot of people aren't doing that, and they're not actually getting vulnerable with anyone.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, and I think I'd be really interested to see what the content of that conversation was when they'd gather around that common thing, because to me, it's all about that element of it. It's great that they can open up. I have friends, guy friends who can open up to me, but there's a very narrow set view of things that they'll open up about, not necessarily things that could actually lead them to feel healing or to experience any sort of transformation in their growth. A lot of times the content keeps them in a static place, and that's why I'm just curious as to what the conversations turned into. Because yes, men opening up and talking to each other is a beautiful thing, but unless they're creating an environment in which they can really address some of these heavier topics with one another, there's limitations for how deep that relationship can go. And that's where I think it can get into a static place. So I agree with everything you guys are saying. Um, but I think just this added element, and maybe not making the argument as much of like, hey, this is going to be the key to unlocking a deeper friendship with a guy, because it's
Mhm.
going to take multiple different tools and approaches in order to have that space with a guy that's deep and meaningful.
Mm. But you know what it was reminding me of was in our teacher training, the be with exercise we did,
Mm-hmm.
which essentially we gathered, you had a partner and you would stand across from that partner. And I mean, upwards of 5 minutes at times, you're just gazing into each other's eyes, like just staring at each other. And so much comes up and realizing, wow, this is so uncomfortable. Why is this so difficult just to look and be with this person with no agenda, no. And I think especially that's difficult for men. And I'm curious what that what is that? What is that that's so hard for men to really look at each other in the eyes, posture themselves so they're facing one another? I mean, there's so much we could dig into there, but that was just one thing that was coming up for me.
Yeah, I think about this idea when you're saying men do well with doing. I go back to how we have evolved and go back to like the hunting and gathering times. And for the most part, men were hunting. They were going out to get the food. And so I think that's where they bonded, was on the hunt. And then women were tending to the homes and nurturing um, the village or the establishment at the time. And so they were a lot more okay with being still. And um, and I think men had to be doing something and being active. Um, that's why I feel like there's so much activity at the camp you guys grew up going to, is because boys, it comes out at a very early age. It's like men or boys want to be active. They have a lot of energy.
There's a lot of research on how there's different cultures around the world where women and men either had the same jobs in a village or in a settlement, or women would do something like that and men had the opposite. And so it's completely cultural in my view. It's not genetic. You're raised to focused on what you're doing, not focused on what you're feeling. And um, with a cultural view like that, I think the reasonable question is that benefiting you in certain aspects of your life? And if it's not, getting rid of or working on getting rid of this prosecutorial approach to um, a masculine man not fitting a totally a masculine mold, or not totally abiding by the masculine gender norms, um, is an important element to this, to allow men to be able to tap into their feminine nature as well and be able to have those both work in harmony with one another.
Much to ponder, much to ponder. Well, I feel like we got to keep moving here, boys, because I know these conversations will flow into the next one. But who's up?
Yeah, Fletch, why don't you bring in your next one?
Yes, this is a figure. I would call him a bit of a celebrity, who I think a lot of high school guys, college guys have looked up to as someone, as a role model, and someone to have a lifestyle like. Um, Definitely when I was in later high school, early college, his clips were going viral because of the lifestyle he was living. Um,
There's
his
only
name
one
is
guy this
Dan.
could be. I was
His name
about
is
to say.
Dan Bilzerian.
There's only
And
one.
right then and there, you go to the girls, you go to the yacht, you go to everything that this guy has. And um, I thought, yeah, that's all I'm gonna to give in terms of context, and then we can watch this clip and then talk about it.
$1 million. A lot of people equate money to happiness, and it's not. It's more freedom. What people don't understand is, like, once you have basic needs met, you don't get incremental happiness for more money. You do for a short period of time. Like, if you're a $100,000 a year guy and I bump you to 200,000, you're going to be happy, but that's not going to last. You're going to get used to 200,000. My problem is, and a lot of rich people, there's nothing that I buy that brings me happiness. I bought a Ferrari. I wasn't happy for more than 24 hours, put 100 miles on the fucking thing in a year and got rid of it. I just didn't care. I can't get pleasure spikes anymore. Being a pleasure seeker is like being a drug addict. You take a Percocet, makes you feel good. Now 2 weeks later, you got to take 2 Percocets to get the same feeling. 3 weeks later, you're taking 3, 4, 5, and then eventually you're taking them just to not feel like shit, and you don't get high anymore. Same thing with pleasure. Pleasure is like fleeting, and pleasure is one of those things where it's like, it's a black hole,
So what makes you happy?
Oh, fuck. Surfing, hanging with my friends,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, this shit that doesn't cost money, to be honest with you. It's kind
Yeah.
of funny, but like...
Deep breath for Dan.
Yeah. Wow. That was honestly like kind of made me sad, to be honest.
What about it?
It's real. I just sensed sadness in his voice, like this recognition of, wow, I climbed this mountain thinking that like pleasure, chasing pleasure just to realize I have all the pleasures I could ever want and I'm empty. And there is this sense of emptiness I like just sensed in his voice. And he is the person that created so much culture around pleasure. And wow, if only I could be around those type of women or have this type of car, right? These things. And I mean, it just reminds me just how fleeting pleasure is. Um, and how often, I mean, I'm learning this, that just most every pleasure has some sort of kickback, especially the ones that tend to be more vice driven, um, where we feel good, like we get that spike, but there's something on the back end that like kicks in, like almost, when you have that big night drinking, right? There's a reason you feel worse the next day. And there's this interesting relationship between pleasure and the opposite of pleasure, which often comes after we've engaged in that dopamine spike, as we have the dip on the back end.
What do you guys think is the need we're trying to fill when we're only looking for pleasure?
Well, it could come from trying to procreate. It could come from a want or yearning to feel like enough, and we're going down the rabbit hole of trying to use pleasure as a way to mask our insecurities and the wounds that we've never healed from. I think pleasure goes into a lot of times with uh, the false identity or the false seeking of identity and the false ways in which the world tells us that we are going to find happiness. Um, it's like an extreme version of the shiny object syndrome, like in multiplied into a lifestyle of perpetual letdown.
Yeah, I'll try to think about it in like my own life, because I'm not sure it's always the same for every person. I think there's a lot of good thoughts there, Fletch. I think for me, it's often like desiring this sense of like comfort, um, or yeah, this sense of feeling something, right? And like it's a confusing world and it's overwhelming at times. And pleasure, like there is this sense of like meaning in it that you feel in the moment, and this sense of comfort, and feeling held, that nothing else matters for that moment because this feeling is so good. And yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's fleeting and it often has a kickback, but in that moment, it feels like it's all that matters if it's really a big enough pleasure spike.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the 6 basic needs of every human, which is certainty, variety, significance, love, growth, and contribution. And
Wait,
I think
Mackenzie, can you say those one more time? And if you're walking or you're doing laundry, just take out your phone real fast, and I would advise you to write them down,
Yeah,
because
what?
These are your needs.
Yeah, you just said it like it was like, yeah, I'm going to tell you basic algebra. You should have learned this.
these are the fundamental 6 basic human
According,
needs.
who is it? Do you know where this framework comes from? Or is it?
So this
Science.
framework is like universal in the coaching industry, and it's something that is just one of those frameworks that's just kind of hit the mainstream, so everyone's referring to it. What, Fletch? What?
It's universal.
It's universal.
You.
All up to you, baby.
So these basic needs are, the first one is certainty. So the assurance, you can avoid pain and gain pleasure. To me, this is like getting the or did I said certainty, right? The first one's certainty. Basically, it's like, how can you make your beliefs and ideas reflexive and structured in your identity. The next one is like variety. So the need to change, the need to have new environments, the need to shake things up. The third one is significance. So feeling unique, important, special, needed. The fourth is love or connection. I like to think of it more as just connection in general. which is pretty straightforward, you know, feeling like a closeness with people. Growth, so the ability to kind of increase your capacity, capability, your ability to learn, understanding of life, and answering those big fundamental questions that you have. And then contribution, so the sense of service, essentially being able to give back and knowing that you are contributing and leaving a legacy. I like to think of that giving more as the legacy is the need, not the giving aspect of it, because that's the outcome. Um, so out of those, I believe it's actually looking for significance more than anything else. We're trying to fit that need of feeling unique, of feeling successful, of feeling important. And I think we try to do that with these commercialized products and houses and cars and all of these things. And so he's chasing significance, in my view.
What about the person who's drinking by themselves at night, you know, and that they're seeking that kind of pleasure? Like that's maybe a different kind. Like there's that more external flashy, and I agree. What
I
about
think
that
they're
more
craving certainty in that.
certainty? In what way?
I think they know what they're getting with alcohol. They know how they feel with alcohol. Um, and then you also have to keep in mind that like these needs kind of go astray in an addiction mindset. And so I think for someone who like is a social drinker, they're doing that. I mean, they're trying to fit multiple needs. It depends on how they're using alcohol, right? But I think for the person who's drinking on their own, and isn't quite addicted to it, but is using it for a behavioral reason or like an emotional reason, I think they're looking for certainty. They know that alcohol can make them feel a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, I also think about social media. I think about food, like some of the more like sneaky ones. And I'm not sure. I don't know in that framework if it is. Maybe this is a question for you guys. Is pleasure a basic human need?
I was having this discussion earlier today um, with a guy, with a buddy of mine, and we were talking about a belief that I have that, I do believe we are meant to enjoy our time on earth. And I think it gets very confusing sometimes when you try to justify pleasure as a sense of enjoyment. And I think it's good to take an audit and reflect on your own life to see when you're masking those pleasures as enjoyment. And I think that the spikes and those pleasures will always kind of feel fleeting. And I know moments will come and go, moments and memories and experiences, they come and go. And you'll understand that there's a beginning, middle, and end with those moments. But I think the feeling feels different. It comes from more of an inside heart posture and an inside knowing that um, you're not controlled as much by that certain circumstance. You're more so in a position that um, you're okay with yourself. You feel good within.
Fletch, let me think out loud on that for a second. So what you're saying is the problem is chasing down a fleeting feeling rather than chasing down a core need. I think that goes along the lines of the last question they asked in the video, which is, okay, then what do you do to feel happy? And I think that's such a stupid question to ask yourself and a stupid question to ask other people, because why ask? It's just such a fleeting emotion, happiness. It's like you're fighting to get to something that's only going to last a couple minutes.
And I think, he was really raw in that moment talking about the activities where he has experience where he just feels good, where he feels like he can just, you know, be himself, and he doesn't have to pose in a certain way to maintain this personal image or a brand that he's created. Because that's where I think it gets really dangerous, right? Is when you have built such a large brand and you've built an identity around something that you're not, it's really hard to then like face who you actually are.
Mm.
And um yeah, I think there kind of is like this unraveling and force to be reckoned with of just an identity crisis of sorts.
And it feels like, yeah, the one thing that's guaranteed is we're going to change. Like we're going to change throughout life. And I think about what brought me pleasure when I was a young kid versus what brings me pleasure, what brought me pleasure in high school and college and now, right? In some ways, the evolution of our relationship with pleasure is our spiritual journey. And you see that like there was a point at which that was giving him pleasure, but as he continued to journey, like what pleasure meant changed. And I've been meditating a lot on a scripture from Psalms, which says, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." That the more we journey, it seems to me, the more we're able to actually find pleasure um, in things that maybe we wouldn't have expected to be able to find pleasure in. The small things, the little beauties, the presence of God, however you may see that, and the people around us. And so I just think it's beautiful how our understanding and our experience with pleasure evolves, but it's still there.
The way I interpret that scripture too, HD, is rather than chasing down the outcome of pursuing your needs, you should be focused on the mindset change you need to have. And then the outcome will come and follow. But if you're trying to skip that step and jump right to the outcome, you won't get there in the same way. It won't feel the same way than if
Yeah.
you than if you're focusing on trying to meet the need in a
Mhm.
healthy way.
Yeah.
And then the outcome's your gift that comes from that.
Hmm. Yeah. Pleasure's not the thing to seek.
Dude, it's so funny that you said that because I feel like, you can have this guy who's driving around a fancy car, and if he's driving around just for status and is really just like flexing on people, you're just like, and then you have this entrepreneur who has it on his vision board, and all he wants is, he's been dreaming about this since he was little, and he works his ass off for 10 years and he gets the car. It's like you can't help but just like root for the guy when you have like a goal, and when you have something that you're working for, it's different. It feels different.
Yeah, we've talked about this on the pod, right? Rather than pursuing the results, you pursue the mission and focus on the mission. You may have a dream outcome, but that's not why. And that's not the reason you're doing everything. You're doing everything because of a certain mission you've established in yourself to create impact and scale impact. And that's meeting so many needs when you find a successful mission in which you feel like you can meet all those needs through that mission. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is they focus on the outcome. A lot of times I'll ask guys like, what do you want? And they'll respond with like, I want a car. I want financial freedom. I want a wife who loves me. I want all of these things. They're only wanting results, and they're not realizing that it takes a mission to get there.
So if you're listening right now, I would urge you to, if you don't have one already, is to grab a pen and paper and write down your mission. And if you don't know, start with what you do know and what you think your mission is right now. Because that exercise will help bring up a lot of what you're living for and the direction in which you're going in your life.
Moving right along.
Last but not least,
Hit us with the data.
No data for me this week.
75% of men.
I brought the data this week.
Thank
So,
and the verse.
as you guys know, we've talked about it a lot. on the pod the book No More Mr. Nice Guy, which is kind of like a wonderful, wonderful overarching approach to how a guy can start to approach or start achieving reaching their needs and being able to heal through some of the trauma and neglect that they may have experienced as a child. And I came across an article, and it really highlights one element of the book that I think we I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on. And this is specifically about the destructive relationship cycles that come up in in a lot of men who are struggling with trying to meet their needs. And the first one is shame recycling. And I find a lot of guys use their generosity and weaponize it when things go awry in their relationships. And I find that kind of fits this mold of shame recycling. We've talked about this on the pod as well in the past. Covert contracts, right? Doing something nice for a partner with the expectation that you're going to get something in return, but that return is never communicated. So it's like, oh, I'm going to do all of these wonderful things for my wife, and in return, I'm expecting her to say this to me, or I'm expecting her to treat me like this now. Um, those covert contracts, to me, really is the shame recycling, because it says it here, right? Due to their toxic shame and low self-respect, they are drawn to domineering, overbearing, and expansive personalities. Relationships that don't fit that mold are scary, as nice guys cannot manipulate these individuals into their wants and desires. Healthy, confident relationships break a nice guy's relationship and love seeking methodology and strategy, right? I see a lot of these men have this strategy in a relationships, which is I'm going to do everything to try to make my wife happy in exchange for loyalty, in exchange for this idea that they can control what their wife does or what their wife believes or or how their wife behaves. And um I think it can come across, or it can be very manipulating, and it can just continue this cycle of men who feel like they're constantly having failed relationships and not actually get to the root of why those relationships are toxic, or why they tend to result, or why they tend to approach um, a more emotional, manipulative approach in the relationship. And so I first want to ask you guys on the recycling of shame. Um, how do you guys see this come up in relationships with friends that you guys have, or how has it come up with you in relationships? Because I definitely felt like the first couple relationships I had as in high school and in college, I definitely felt like there was shame that I wasn't addressing, and so it just came up in more of these emotional, manipulative ways where I would have these covert contracts or ways to kind of manage or manipulate my partner into getting what I want, or to try to meet one of my needs. Um, but it came from a low self respect and toxic shame. I want to see how it comes up with you guys and whether you guys feel the same way.
I feel like something that's so important with those contracts, and even when I'm hearing you talk about this idea of shame recycling, is communication. And that is something that I have struggled with in all of my relationships with myself, my relationships with friends, just all of my relationships. I have this weird thing that I feel like people know what I'm thinking, and it's sometimes trusting that body language or vibes are enough. And I've noticed that the lack of communication has affected and impacted my relationships in a negative way. And not communicating what I want, what I need, and how I envision certain things has come back to bite me in the anus.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point, which is, and I'm not saying this as any means to insult you, Fletcher, or anything like that, but
No, go ahead.
that approach feels like something a preschooler would do, right? Of just like, I'm gonna sit and pout, and hopefully they come to me and tell me what's wrong, or comfort me, or do whatever, right? I'm expecting them to do something in return. And I think that goes to the very premise, which is we kind of stop gaining self or emotional knowledge and emotional awareness at around that age of 5, 6, 7 as boys, because that's when the mutilation between boys begins. And that's when the bullying between boys begins. And we no longer embrace trying to handle emotional problems in the proper or in the mature way, because we've never been taught those tools. um, and so that's where I see a lot of men revert back to that. I see it all the time, Fletch, like every freaking day. Men tend to result back to a 5 or 6 year old's approach to handling conflict, or handling betrayal, or handling embarrassment, or handling some of these emotions that are aligned as more emotionally weak or inferior emotions. And it's because that's where our emotional brain stopped when we were 6, 7, 8, because we've been raised to just focus on results and not focus on how we're feeling.
Hmm. This,
I hear you, and I feel like maybe that is like the whole idea in the work of like healing the inner kid, is being able to go back and look at some of that stuff. But what I hear you saying is where the development stops. I feel like I didn't even have any sort of language about emotional intelligence, or didn't even put my finger on that pulse until like high school and college. And then from there, I I didn't do any of the quote unquote work until problems came up, and then it forced me into a corner. um and I was forced to kind of look at situations through a different lens. I think what doesn't feel good as a man, and what doesn't feel good when you talk to a man, is telling them that their emotions stop developing as a preschooler, or at a preschool level, because I think it belittles where they're at today. And I think it belittles their evolution and their willingness to even sit down and have that conversation. So I don't know. These are just thoughts that are coming off the rip here, and I'm just
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
feeling it out.
and generally, Fletch, I find that you're way more emotionally aware than a lot of other men I work with. There's a lot of men out there who actually get relieved when they hear something like that, because it makes them realize that, oh, this actually might not be my fault. This actually might be something that I was raised into, not something that I was just born as this person who's just bad at emotions. This idea that, oh, a community raised me to be like this. I can see that point, but for the most part, there's a lot of guys who get a lot of relief in the idea that this isn't, I'm not to blame, but it is my problem to solve.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see where you're coming from.
Hmm.
HD.
Yeah. I mean, just the thing that comes up around shame recycling. It's I like that they put it in context to a relationship, because there's nothing scarier for me in the points in my life in which I have had shame and low self-respect, and I believe also other men, than intimacy. Like true intimacy will expose the shame and low self-respect in ways that nothing else can. I mean, it is, talk about one of the greatest tools for self-awareness is actually truly allowing ourselves to be fully seen. And so I think about in my life, just some of the shame recycling that happened after I had been in relationship for so long, and then kind of came out of it in college and had that summer, Fletch, where we were traveling, And I went from having this like source for affirmation and that kind of sense of comfort, to no longer having that in another person and like a partner. And I found that looking back, I cringe at some of the stuff I was posting because I was seeking that approval in what was really me. I think experiencing some serious shame and low self-efficacy, self-respect, in which I didn't really love myself, and I was trying to convince others that I was lovable, and I was looking for that sense of approval, that validation. And I think it shows up a lot that on social media, in the relationships we form, not just in our partnerships, but also just the ways in which we begin to need the approval of others, um, and end up manipulating others to get that. And I can definitely think about some times in which unknowingly that's exactly what was happening in my life.
Yeah. Um, and I also see this come up in a very common problem, which is a guy will go out and treat the mailman like a king,
Hmm.
but then they'll talk to their wife like absolute shit and with disrespect. And they're always like, I don't know why this is. I don't know why I can't have a deep conversation with my wife or partner without getting angry. And I always tell them it's a very simple reason. The mailman is not close to the truth. A wife or a partner is close to the truth, and they may ask or say something that forces you to face
Mm-hmm.
the shame or face the grief
Right.
or face the guilt.
Yeah. And the second they do, chances are that person's running the other direction. I can't be in this relationship anymore because
Or men will explode. And that's where we get
yeah.
to that second tier of this article, which is the terrible enders, right? Men, nice guys specifically, will fall fast for a girl, right? My first girlfriend, didn't know her on Thursday, met her on Friday. We hung out on Saturday, and by Monday we were in a relationship.
And
you
you
know,
would have been ready to drop down on your knee by Wednesday.
ready to go. Yeah. So nice guys will run into a relationship, and the reason for that is quite simple. Or at least the typical reason is quite simple. Once a man starts opening up to a woman or to a potential prospective, there it is again. See, it always comes up at different parts of the pod.
Dude, because computer knows you're a nice
I
guy.
know. And I did this or something a couple days ago in a meeting where I did this and confetti fell. And I was like, what the? I'm talking about something not cool. It is. But anyway, guys will run into a relationship very quickly. And oftentimes it's because of this notion that, oh, I'm going to keep up my image. I'm going to keep up my masculine image. I'm going to keep it up, keep it up, keep it up. And then as soon as the girl is able to reveal that more sweet, sensitive, delicate side of my personality, I'm going to fall in hard because that's the only person now who is my emotional outlet for those more feminine qualities that I'm struggling with or I'm trying to conceal or bury. And so guys are either all in or they're all out. There's no progress or there's no slow moving in a relationship because once the trust is established, they're going to lean onto that trust to fit their entire identity and to get all of their needs met that they're not getting met in a masculine environment or in their masculine act that they're putting on in front of other people. And so that's where this terrible enders comes into play, which is when they feel like someone's poking and prodding too much at that thing that they don't even want to face, or when that woman is starting to criticize the man and call him out on the things that he's struggling with, they bow out quick because any indication that they're going to get to something too close to home that they don't want to face, they're out of there. And so I see that happen in a lot of divorces that I work through with men, where
Yeah.
again, for those of you who are listening, every time I like am pointing, it's giving like a thumbs up icon, and it's infuriating. I gotta find a way to turn that off, or I'll just complain to Apple. But so I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and whether that's come up in your life at all, or if you've seen that happen.
This one is very real to me right now in my life. Not for me personally, but from someone I'm very close to, who's noticed this cycle, and hopefully has just broken the cycle. Just got out of a relationship, and it wasn't a terrible ending, and maybe the first time in their lives in which it wasn't. Um, and hopefully seeing some growth there. But one of the things that I've seen, this inability to have that hard conversation, inability to end it when you know it needs to end, and just stay in it because you want to be the nice guy. One is you end up damaging a lot more people, as this mentions. Um, so you're not actually doing anyone a favor there, especially yourself. Um, and two, it can also lead people into infidelity, and actually lead a lot of men to cheat on their girlfriends or their wives because they're actually in a relationship. They're literally in the relationship, but their heart is no longer in this relationship. And it's that space where really bad things can happen in a relationship, and you can end up not only damaging the relationship, but really like deeply traumatizing even your partner, or creating just hurt that is so much more difficult to come back from than if you would just embrace the conversation, and put your 2 feet in the ground and say, this is what I'm feeling, and this is what I need, and this is why it's not working. So this one's real, man, and it definitely, um, man, I feel for those guys because their intention is often to be nice, and
Yeah.
I found myself in this too. It's not just others. The intention is good, but the action ends up being so much more detrimental.
So I see this impacting the statistic of uh, separation and divorce filings. Most of the time it's women who are filing the separation or filing the divorce. And I think it's so easy for a guy to say, well, that's because women are the ones who want to find another guy, or women are the ones who want to find another relationship or whatever. But we're not taking into account this aspect of it, which is men might be holding on to their relationship long after they're emotionally vested in it. And um and so, I've posted articles about this where I've gotten massive backlash from a lot of guys because they feel as though I'm putting the blame on guys when women are to blame. And this is where I think blame needs to get out of the equation here culturally, because just because the woman might be filing the divorce or the separation doesn't mean that the guy didn't emotionally divorce or separate from that woman to begin with. And um just the woman is able to face it more than the man, because the man has this terrible trauma or shame or grief around something in their mind, and they're trying to find ways to cope with that through the relationship. And so figuring out the whole story here is so important when we talk about why relationships fail. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that women are immune to causing a relationship to fail as well, but that's the thing, is like we shouldn't be focused on women are to blame, men are to blame. We should be focused on why are men struggling to work through a relationship, or just dive into a relationship head first without actually doing a proper courting of the person they're dating before they lean into them.
Mm.
So what do you think about that, HD?
Specifically, like why men will jump into a relationship, like this idea of jumping in super quickly.
Yeah, and just the concept of like, when with women largely being the ones who file the divorce or
Right.
separation,
Right.
what what about this problem
Mm.
are we neglecting, and why?
Yeah, I mean, it was just reminding me of someone else in my life who is separated right now, and he's been separated for a long time now. It's been over a year and a half, and if she called him tomorrow, I'm pretty sure he would probably take her back. But like, there's this unwillingness to just kind of move on. This struggle um, to be the one that takes a step and says, "No, we're filing for divorce. Like, this is over. This is done." And I mean, I think this nice guy syndrome it speaks. It's a convicting idea of like, you know, is it just not wanting, like, I don't know, the fear of failure, I think, is part of it. This feeling like our worth as men is so wrapped up in our ability to find solutions and problem solve, and that somehow by not being able to make it work, um, we failed, and our manhood is threatened in the process. And I think I see that a lot with men in divorce. Is they'll do anything to fight for their marriage,
Yeah.
not even because it's the right thing for them, but because it's terrifying to think about facing that failure in their own communities.
Or face the fear of being abandoned and alone.
Yeah,
I
on the
think
others. Yeah.
a lot of men experience abandonment as children, and that fear comes up in so many ways in these relationships because the last close female relationship they had was with their own mother. And
Mm.
so, especially if they have a situation where they feel neglected by their mom, this can come up very heavily in their relationship. And before we wrap up, I really want to bring this back to what you brought today and this week, because we talked about why men can't face each other face to face and why that feels uncomfortable. When you go with the premise that 80% of communication is through body language, and you know that there are lots of guys out there who are experiencing shame and don't want to face it, facing someone face to face and having them look into your eyes is a very scary prospect, right? We talk about why men treat their wives, or why a lot of men who are going through issues with their partner treat their wives like absolute crap and don't want to look at them face to face, don't want to look at them eye to eye. I think it's our body reacting to the fact that we are trying to avoid the shame
Mm.
that we're feeling
Mm.
deep inside.
Well, that's good, man. Yeah, I think Fletch said something on this podcast. He's like, I have this fear that people can read my mind. They can read my thoughts.
Exactly.
And I think that is a lot of what's happening, whether subconsciously or consciously. This, if only people really knew what happens when I shut my door. If only people really knew what I've done, they wouldn't want to talk to me. They wouldn't want to
Exactly.
be near me. And so I need to turn away. I need to create this literal distance so that people can't actually see the full me. Um, Not
That's
even if it's, yeah. So it's
that's
real,
so
man.
true though. That's the you're hitting it right on the nose of like the point I'm trying to make. And I
Yeah.
you articulated that so much better than I could, because I just, that is what I'm seeing in
Mm.
all of my conversations with men. And that's why something like sitting face to face with someone like me, who will ask them questions that get them to that truth, is a very scary prospect and very intimidating. And a lot of
Yeah,
times they're very nervous when they start
for sure.
because they feel ill equipped to navigate their feelings, and they're worried that they're going to get to the truth,
Hmm.
or the truth that they're
Yeah,
telling themselves, the story that they're
yeah.
telling themselves.
And I've also seen so much freedom come when someone says, like, finally shares that thing that makes them feel so unlovable. And the group kind of goes, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. The hands start going up, and you realize, wow, that thing that you think makes you completely unlovable is something a lot of people are also experiencing and also believe makes them unlovable. And it's just not true. And we have to like fight that lie, because it can start to just tear apart our lives.
Yeah. And when you're able to face the shame and be able to grieve whatever it is you need to grieve through that shame and burn out that grief we've talked about it before on the pod, the natural emotion that comes to you in that moment after burning out that grief is self-acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest thing you want, right? Is to feel self-acceptance. And I see that come up a lot in facing a lot of these emotions that our mind is trying to keep us away from, because our mind is only built to survive and it's not built to thrive.
Mm.
And so when we have these fears in a conversation, a difficult, vulnerable conversation with somebody else, and we're super scared, and we're like, I'm not going to do that. When you do that, almost always after the conversation ends, even if it doesn't go the way you want, you'll still feel empowered. You'll still feel like, oh, I got that off my chest, right? And that's that premise of like burning out the things that your mind is trying to prevent, facing it, embracing that discomfort, and leaning into it so that you can thrive and get to those emotions that allow you to thrive. But those emotions won't come unless you face the defensive emotions that are in the way.
Yeah. And it's amazing how many people want to jump to those good emotions. They just want them, right? And I'm sure there's plenty of programs out there that just offer you all the things, right? With none of the work. But I think we know nothing truly transformational comes without work on the front end. Like you have to sacrifice something. You have to be willing to go to the place that is most painful in order to get to the place that is most fulfilling and joyful.
Exactly. I've talked about this with you internally just the other day in one of our meetings, that, people will hold on to a story until they discover something they value more. And a lot of times that story we're telling ourselves is just that, a story of survival, a story of trauma, a story that creates barriers for what we're capable of. And our problem that we get a lot of the time, the essence of the problem, is that we're trying to meet our needs and slot them into the story that we've been telling ourselves. And we're not sitting there realizing, okay, what do I value? What matters most to me? And really facing that and articulating that in your mind, and being able to drop the story that you've been telling yourself so that you can meet your needs through your values rather than meeting your needs through a story. And that is the biggest hurdle, the essence of the biggest hurdle I see men face in this shame and grief is they face it, but then they still use their story to keep themselves from transformation. And that's the battle, is realizing that your story is holding you back. Your story is keeping you in survival mode and not keeping you, or not allowing you to enter into a season of thriving prosperity in your life and fulfillment and joy.
Well said, bro. Stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. It's a worthy place to spend some time. I know we'll keep digging into it, but for this episode, any final thoughts?
Well, since Fletch had to step away middle of the podcast, I'll do the word.
Okay.
Or if you can think of a word, think of a word.
I feel like it's just always got to be the first word that comes to mind. And Tarzan.
Ready? Here, I'll do mine. Golden Cow Creamery.
Oh, so many words. Oh, beautiful. Hey guys, thanks for getting to the end with us. We really appreciate y'all being here. Make sure wherever you're listening to this to go rate it and share it with a friend. It really helps get the word out there about this podcast. And there's one more thing that I really want to share with you guys. Beyond the Beat, which is a film we've been working on for the last several years, is officially live on Amazon. This is a big deal for us, and we really would love to hear what you guys think about it. So go and watch Beyond the Beat. It's this story about these three amazing friends who started a creative arts festival in the wake of a 2-decade civil war in northern Uganda. The film explores the potential and the power of art and creativity to inspire communities and really to bring healing in our lives and in communities all around the world. We think there's a ton of value in it, and we had a blast making it. So please go check it out and let us know what you think. And we'll see you next week. Peace, y'all.